Hello everyone and welcome to Motorcyclegear.com. Today we are taking a look at the 2024 Honda Rebel 1100T. Let me go ahead and break down the format here, as bike reviews are new to our channel. So for each bike that I review, there will be 3 videos. The first will be a full overview. In that I will cover specs, my first impressions, my overall review of the bike, and then to close things out I will answer 2 questions. If I think the bike is worth buying, and the second, if I would buy the bike personally. Then on the other 2 videos, the first will be a 5 things I like about the bike. Second video is going to be about the 5 things that I don't like. Alright, with all that said, I have been riding for just about 20 years now. I got my moto license back when I was 18. I am now 38, so simple math there. The first bike that I owned was a Yamaha Virago 250, but it was not the first bike that I had ever ridden. First bike that I have ever ridden would actually be a Honda Rebel 250 that was a part of the fleet of bikes in my MSF course. That's right, kind of a full circle moment here, and really an interesting one at that. So long story short, I learned to ride on a Honda Rebel, and for the longest time the Rebel was kind of synonymous with small starter bikes. And then eventually the Rebel grew from a 250 to a 300, and then obviously there's also the Rebel 500, right? But still, for a long time, it kind of had this small learner bike feeling stuck with it, kind of a stigma of being a beginner learner bike. Till eventually one day Honda said, hey, we are doing a Rebel again, but this time the Rebel is going to be a 1100. Now, that just didn't sound real, and it kind of had me wondering, is this thing going to be legit? Is it finally going to be a Rebel for big kids, if you will? So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the specs and then we can dive in further. So the engine is not quite 1100 cc's, but that's how most bikes are. They kind of round up, so it's 1083 cc's. It is liquid cooled, and it is a Unicam 4-stroke, a 22.5 degree parallel twin. Power output is going to be 86 horsepower and 72 foot-pounds of torque. The wet weight is going to be 542 pounds. Now keep in mind that is for the T version specifically. The fuel tank is 3.6 gallons, and there is a 6-speed manual transmission on this bike, but a DCT is offered, so you do have that choice depending on what you prefer. Looking at suspension, we do have 43mm conventional forks in the front with dual Showa shocks with piggyback pressurized reservoirs sitting out the back. The front brake is a single 330mm disc with a 4-piston radially mounted caliper, and the back is going to be 256mm with a 1-piston caliper, and the bike does feature ABS. Now lastly, the seat height comes in a very approachable 27.5 inches, and the starting price, depending on which version you get and what choices you make between transmission and everything, is anywhere from roughly $9,000 up to about $10,500. Okay, so with the specs out of the way, it's very clear that this Rebel is the real deal. It is a big engine, solid power, almost equal torque, and with this T version you get bags and a fairing, and with a starting price in the mid 10K range, you do get quite a bit for your money. Now here's the thing, you guys, I'm primarily a sport bike and naked bike kind of guy, but since I learned initially on a Honda Rebel, and then my first bike being a Yamaha Virago 250, I have always had a bit of a soft spot for the cruiser bike. But at the same time, my issue is with most cruisers, they're just giant and heavy. They're not as agile in the steering department, they're kind of hard to deal with in tighter spaces, and overall performance just isn't there for me. Granted, I understand they're never going to be a sport bike type of a ride, which is the whole point of them not being one, but I just don't like giant bikes. I'm not going to call out anyone here, but I'm sure you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. A lot of cruisers that are 800 plus pounds, that just isn't for me at that point. Like, it's just massive. I'm not a fan of that. On the flip side though, all the cruisers that were lighter, smaller, and more nimble were primarily what I would call a mini cruiser, or a Rebel 300 for example, or a Virago 250, or bikes that kind of looked the part, but they were a lot smaller, and though they were great for beginners, they just came up really short for a more experienced rider, especially when it came to their lack of power. A lot of these 250s, 300s, they're making like 15 to 30 horsepower. There's not a whole lot there. So when the Rebel 1100, and now more specifically the 1100T, were released, I was super excited. Finally, a smaller, lighter, more agile, and nimble cruiser with the same look that I like, especially with this T version having a windshield and bags, and now with an engine that packs a proper amount of punch in this 1100 that makes more than enough power at 86 horses for your normal riding situations. Really, it's kind of a best of both worlds situation for me. Honestly, I was super excited to give this bike a try, so shout out to Honda for making that happen. Initially, my impressions are that this bike is indeed lightweight. It feels stable and agile, no issues from feeling too bulky or boat-like, something that can plague, cruisers as a whole. Center of gravity feels good, suspension feels good, and there's definitely more than enough power. Sure, it's not sport bike levels of power like I said before, but it's not supposed to be, as the riding experience and delivery or power are meant to be a completely different feeling on a cruiser. Really no complaints so far from those categories, so good to go. I will say, even with only being a few miles in, I do have one pretty major gripe though, and that is the controls. No, there's nothing wrong with them. The shifter feels fine, the rear brake control feels fine. Overall, the control levers click and move as they should, but it's their placement that I don't like. This bike is just begging for forward controls, especially with this T version. I feel too upright and a bit stiff with my feet right underneath me. So, and again, with me being 6 foot, I think I'm right around that limit of height before one would start feeling super cramped. I think somebody taller than me would definitely complain about space, and I think forward controls would make it feel more spacious and much more comfortable. I feel like I'd be able to sprawl out and relax more. It's a bit of a miss for me, and maybe in the next update Honda can consider that, again, especially on this T version. So yeah, so far overall experience is really good, and it's definitely checking all of the major cruiser vibe boxes, minus the whole forward controls part. But overall, I can see this bike as a great commuter bike, a bike that you can just take out on the weekend for short and medium length rides, kind of like I am today. And honestly, I could even see it as a longer tour ride type of bike, so it definitely has a lot of good going for it. Also, I'm going to say that I'm a big fan of this dash. It's very simple and old school looking. It definitely fits the design of this bike, but it still is not super basic or hard to use. It's really easily readable and has a good amount of information and adjustment customization, so I definitely appreciate that. Also, overall, I really like the blacked out look that Honda did. All of the metal is blacked out, so there's no visible shiny metal or chrome. That, and I will say that there have been some really nice color options available since this bike has come out. I've seen some burnt oranges, dark greens, dark and flaky silvers, browns, dark reds, almost like a purple, maroon color, one that I would call something like a root beer. Some really great choices. So again, hats off to Honda for not keeping it too basic with just black and white. And even though there are the more calmer colors, the more safe colors, like this one right here, the black, even this black isn't just a simple gloss black. It might not show that well on camera, but it's actually a black with a ton of shiny flake in it, and in the sunlight it looks really, really good. And to keep it from looking too simple and boring, Honda did put bronze wheels on this bike too, so I do think that really complements the black paint really well, and it does give it that extra pop. So whoever's doing the paint picking for the Rebel 1100 and the 1100T over at Honda, great work, and definitely keep that going. Alright everyone, so I need to spend some more time with this bike. I want to do some more miles, some more riding, and I think I'm going to take it up and down the Pacific Coast Highway here. I'll do some town riding, some freeway riding, and just kind of see how well it does overall. Alright, so back to the topic at hand. I have had the chance to put about 300 miles on this bike, and I have ridden it on the freeway in both minimal traffic and during morning rush hour, kind of weaving between cars. I have taken it around town, again, both in normal and heavy traffic, and I have also taken it up some scenic rides like the Pacific Coast Highway, a few canyon runs, and so on. So really, I wanted to give it a fair shake and see how it does in multiple different scenarios and different ride types. So let's start off with the exterior. Honestly, I think it just looks great. The blacked out design is awesome. I'm not really a huge fan of bare metal or chrome, so I love the fact that Honda made a design choice to paint everything in this black color. Speaking of paint options every year so far have been great. There seems to always be at least one safe color, like a black or a white or a silver, something that someone who doesn't want anything crazy can pick, but then there's always one or two really fun or more wild colors, kind of custom looking colors available. Things like military green, purple, orange, brown, really a lot of great choices. And the bike overall just looks good to me. It has good proportions, it fits the cruiser part, especially in this T version, and overall I just think it looks proper, so that's good. And what I mean by it looks proper is, some bikes, they kind of look cheap or sloppy or have some other visual issues, and this bike doesn't. I feel like wherever I pulled up, whether it was, like a bike place, like a bike shop, or a meetup, or more of a civilian place like a a coffee shop or a grocery store, it really didn't matter. I always got positive looks, thumbs up, good feedback. So it felt good pulling up on it. So definitely a good looking bike. From a performance standpoint, absolutely no complaints about the engine. It has plenty of power, plenty of torque. Power band and power delivery is solid. I always felt like it was a good amount of power when I needed it, where I needed it, so no complaints there. It even sounds decent for a stock exhaust parallel twin, and that's praise coming from me. As you guys might already know, I'm not really a huge fan of what parallel twins normally sound like, so again, sounds pretty good. Handling feels good. Maneuvering between cars in and out of tight spaces, no problem. The dash has a super classic round and singular look to it, but if you look closely, you will notice that it has a lot of information displayed, has a good amount of options and customizations, and the electronics that you adjust quite a bit. Things like engine braking, power delivery, traction control. So compared to most bikes, especially in this price range, it has a lot going on. Also, it's really legible and easy to see, so again, no complaints there. Really happy with everything I've mentioned so far, and then when you really consider the price, being in that 9 to 10K range, obviously depending on the option that you pick, manual, DCT, whatever, it's really a lot of value for your money. And I really want to make sure I don't gloss over that either. The fact that there is a DCT version available, that too is really cool, because with the DCT and the low seat height, this bike really becomes accessible to a lot more riders based off of size and experience. As much as I am happy with this bike, it's not without faults, right off the bat. I think the seat kind of sucks. For being a cruiser, and of course being the T version, being a touring style cruiser, to me the seat really isn't all that comfortable. I said it in the previous video and I'll say it again, Honda's own CBR 650R that I had at the same time as this bike for testing was actually more comfortable to me, which makes absolutely no sense, since that is a sport bike and should never be competing for comfort. In fact, the seat bothered me enough that I would say that if I owned this bike, I would be making a new seat my first modification above all else. Another gripe that I have is the brakes. No, there isn't technically anything wrong with them. They're not terrible and they do okay, but in this price range, in this size of bike, and for a bike with this much power, and obviously in 2024, I do want to see a dual disc setup on the front. I think it would really take this bike one step further in both the performance category, but also in the looks category, or in the being serious as an adult bike category, and distancing itself further from its smaller siblings like the Rebel 300 and 500. Lastly, I think Honda just didn't fully commit to the T design or version. Forward controls will really do wonders on this bike, and I think that's how it should come standard versus the regular standard Rebel. I honestly just don't see why that isn't the case. It would also make it more comfortable for taller riders, which would then expand Honda's ability to sell more bikes. So kind of a win-win. Okay, so today is the day that I have to give this bike back, and I will say that I will miss it. I definitely enjoyed my time on it and everything that it had to offer, but now it is time to answer the two important questions. One, do I think it's good value? Do I think it's worth buying? And two, would I buy it with my own money? Let's start with the first question. With everything that you get in the 9 to just under 11,000 price range, bundled with Honda quality, reliability, and especially in the T version with the practicality of having bags and a windscreen included, cool looks and the cruiser feel without the massive size being considered, I think you really get a lot for your money, and I think this bike is a great value. I also think it'll have good resale. I think it'll do well on gas, maintenance, insurance costs, and overall should serve you well for many different types of riding situations. It can easily be your only bike. It can easily function for both fun and necessity with commuting. And overall, I really think you can't go wrong with this bike, especially if you're a person that started off on a smaller Rebel or other small cruiser and have outgrown them and want something with a little bit of a bigger engine, more powerful. This is a great place to go. I think mid-range and even advanced riders can find something here that they like, and I think with the power delivery and with the customizable settings, more responsible riders could even have this as a first or beginner bike. So yeah, to answer the first question, I think the Rebel 1100 and especially the T version are in my opinion a great value and definitely worth buying. Now on to the next question. Would I buy this bike with my own money? And unfortunately, that answer is no. I was so excited for this bike. It checked the boxes for me of a cruiser style bike without all the big bike weight, but it just doesn't quite push me over the edge. At this moment, if I was going to consider buying a non-sport or naked type of bike, I would be looking at the Triumph Bonneville Bobber, and I know that they're not quite direct competitors, but that is where my head is at and where my money would go. With that said, this bike is on average 3 to 4 grand less expensive than the Bobber, and in a way that is what is hurting this bike for me. Now you might say, how is the bike being less expensive a bad thing? And it's not that the price is a bad thing, it's what this bike loses because of that savings. If Honda were to take that 3 to 4 grand and give this bike a bigger brake setup with front dual discs, a better seat, slightly bigger bag so that way at least one side could hold a full face helmet, and above all else, forward controls, then my answer to this question would be yes. In fact, I would probably own one already, but unfortunately that isn't the case. Maybe in the future Honda will release a different version of this bike or an update that features all the things that I mentioned, but until then, unfortunately, my answer has to stay at no. Alright guys and gals, that is it for my review of the Honda Rebel 1100T. Don't forget, in the next 2 videos I will be covering the 5 things that I like and the 5 things that I don't like about this bike. Now be sure to visit Motorcyclegear.com, as we would love to help you out with your motorcycle gear needs. You can also hit us up via phone or email, and if you'd like to share your thoughts on this video or the Honda Rebel 1100T, feel free to drop them down in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. Till next time.